In this video, I'm going to review some basics of the questions for the ethical thinking paper. So just some basics. When I ask for a paragraph is defined as 5 to 7 relevant sentences. You have to use 4 of your own references for the assignment. Depending on the topic we are covering, I may have given you a podcast or an article, and that is fair game to use. With your 4 references, you reference them in the text like you would in an English paper, and then you need a works cited page at the end. And just a reminder, if you've written for me before in science, I do not want quotes. So any references you use, you put things in your own words, and then you reference them. And if you don't understand them or what they're saying, then you ask me, but I do not want you using quotes. Okay, so question 1. At this point, you shouldn't be listening to this until we've gone through an overview of the whole process and what an ethical dilemma or question is. So in 1, I've explained the ethical dilemma and explained why it is a dilemma that must be analyzed. Hint, the answer is not that an ethical dilemma because it has more than one right answer, blah, blah, blah. So the key to this question is to put whatever the subject matter is, whatever the issue is, into an ethical frame of mind question. So usually starts with should or ought. It's going to have more than one right answer or more than one possible solution, but you don't tell me that. Okay. An ethical dilemma, that is the definition of an ethical dilemma. One that doesn't have a right answer or a wrong answer, that there are strengths and weaknesses to any solution. In this question, you are explaining to me what the ethical dilemma is and why as a society we need to discuss it. So depending on what the ethical dilemma is, why do we need to discuss it? Okay, so I will use as an example here, let's say embryonic stem cells. Embryonic stem cells come from an embryo, which means the embryo is destroyed, and those cells can be used in research to develop tissues, which can then be used to cure people of diseases. So if we were doing that, you would tell me what the ethical dilemma is. Should we use embryonic stem cell for research? And then you explain to me why society has to talk about that. So we have to talk about it because, yes, while it can be used for research to save people's lives, depending on when you believe life begins, you are destroying a life by destroying that embryo. Okay. So this question is about why we have to discuss it. Why is it an issue that people, let's say at a dinner party, are going to discuss because it's an ethical issue. So why as a society do we need to make decisions on some of these ethical issues? So you pick the issue that we are doing for that year and you give me the question and you explain why society needs to talk about it. Okay, why do we have to talk about it? Why is it important to talk and to come up with possible solutions? Okay. Okay, and number 2, use the 8 key questions. And at this point, we should have gone through the 8 key questions. Find which 2 or 3 you find most important when looking at this particular question. Okay, so you look at the 8 key questions and then you pick the 2 or 3 that for you are most relevant to answering or coming up with a solution for the problem we are discussing. Now, for this question, you're going to explain why you chose each question. You don't explain to me your answer to the question and how it's relevant to the issue, but why did you choose those questions? So the example I use in class is that if I was a very strict Catholic, okay, then I would pick authority because if I'm a person that uses my religion to make decisions on ethical issues, then authority for me would be the most relevant. So if I was picking that, I would say authority. I wouldn't talk about it in terms of the issue, but I would talk about it in terms of my religion's really important to me, if that was true is really important to me. And so when I am going to make a decision, let's say about embryonic stem cells, I'm going to use authority as one of my questions. So in this question, you are explaining why you've chosen the questions, not your answers to the questions, but why you have chosen the questions you have chosen. Remember, you don't discuss all 8. You just pick the 2 or 3 that are relevant to you. And these questions, the ones you pick, may be different depending on the issue we are discussing. Okay, number 3, and again, remember you don't have to write these in order, but I'm just going to go through them in order. So in 3, you discuss your viewpoint on the issue and how the answers to the 8 key questions influenced your thoughts. So now, once you've read about the issue and you've learned about all the facts and you've learned about the stakeholders and you come up with a solution, you're now going to answer the 8 key questions and how those answers to the 8 key questions have led you to the solution. Okay. So, if religion governed and a certain religion governed your thoughts on ethical issues, and let's just say, using Catholic Church again, the Catholics believe that life starts at conception, then you would discuss how authority is one of my 8 key questions. And my answer to that question is that my authority believes that it should not be done. And so in this case, you would say you were against embryonic stem cells. Okay. Now remember, as I go through these, I'm using the examples. Very little of what I'm saying to you is true about me. I'm just using those examples. Okay. So now you answer your 8 key questions, and how you answer those questions determines what your viewpoint is on the issue. Okay. So here you're going to discuss your viewpoint and how your answers to the 8 key questions have influenced your viewpoint on it. So if you're using 2 or 3 questions here, you need to be discussing those questions here. Those 8 key questions have to come up in this discussion on your viewpoint. Okay. Number 4, how has your life experience influenced the formation of your viewpoint and your answers to the key questions? So here's where you need to think about what has influenced my thoughts on this issue. What is leading me towards my answer? How am I influenced? So you're younger, and we've talked about this. Your experiences for some of you is minimum, and that's normal. Some of you have had experiences that a lot of older people have not. Those are important also. But what in your life has influenced you to think the way that you think? Okay, so you have to start, again, I say this a lot, thinking about your thinking. Okay, why do you think the way you do? Remember, you need to be specific. So if you talk about religion, you have to give me the religion and you have to give me what their viewpoint is on that religion. You can't just say, well, it's because of my religion and that's just what they say. You have to just talk about it in detail. If you use examples like, well, my parents raised me this way, or my aunt raised me, or whatever, again, you have to say more than that. What have they done and what have they said specifically that has influenced how you feel about this issue? And then if you've had a specific life experience, something unique that has influenced the way you think, you need to talk about it so you get an understanding of why you think the way that you think. Number 5, what factual information supports your viewpoint? It will depend on the issue, how many facts are out there. If we're doing an issue that's very current, you may have a harder time trying to find facts. And the fact that there aren't facts available may be influencing your decision, and that's fair. If there hasn't been a lot of research, there may not be a lot of evidence to support the issue, depending on what we're talking about. But what factual information supports your viewpoint? This is where you will use most of your references. You may also use some in number 1, but 5 is where you'll use most of them. So make sure you don't quote and make sure you put the information in your own words and talk about how it influences the facts that are out there, influence and support your viewpoint. Okay, number 6, which stakeholders support your viewpoint and how do their answers to the key questions influence their viewpoint? So in any problem that we're dealing with, we would have sat down and looked at which stakeholders are relevant to your issue, which stakeholders have viewpoints or are affected or influenced by the issue we are discussing. So discuss the stakeholders that support your viewpoint and use the key questions and their answers to the key questions that you think are most important, that they will support your viewpoint on the issue. Okay. Understanding that there are some stakeholders who Some will support and some wouldn't. Okay, some will be for or against your solution. But again, we should have in class listed stakeholders discuss the most relevant in terms of how they would support your viewpoint and their answers to the key questions that would lead to them supporting your viewpoint. Okay. Number 7, if your viewpoint was accepted by society, what would be the implications and consequences, good and bad, for each of the stakeholders in all of society? Okay, 2 parts of this question. First part should be relatively easy to write because you're going to talk about the positive aspects of your viewpoint. If your viewpoints came true, what positive things would influence stakeholders and society? How would society positively change, and how would stakeholders view that as a positive thing? So what good things would come out of your viewpoint? The harder part to write is the negative consequences of your viewpoint. And remember, in an ethical question, there are always negative consequences. Okay, there are always negative consequences. So usually first paragraph is positive, second paragraph is negative. My grading will focus on the negative because you need to show me as a good thinker that you know that there are negative consequences to any viewpoint on an ethical issue. Okay, there always are. So you need to be able to see those. You need to be able to see those and write about the negatives to a group of stakeholders. Look at the stakeholders. What's the negative consequences to those stakeholders going to be? Number 8. Some people have trouble with number 8 too, because you believe that if you write about an opposing viewpoint, that means you think that. And that's not what this is. Again, this is about becoming a more positive and a better thinker. Okay. And good thinkers know that there are different viewpoints than theirs, and they can articulate the opposing viewpoint with the positives of the negative or the opposite viewpoint. So describe a viewpoint on an issue that differs from yours, explain the facts, stakeholders, their responses to the key questions, and that support the opposing viewpoints, the implications and consequences of each of the viewpoints. Okay, so 3 paragraphs. So you're basically doing what you did for 3, 4, 5, and 6 when you were supporting your viewpoint. You're doing the same thing, and 7 actually. You're doing the same thing for the opposing viewpoint in question 8. So it doesn't have to be as long as this, but it should be a good chunk of writing. That's why I have 3 paragraphs. It should be 3 paragraphs on why the opposing viewpoint, the same thing you did for your viewpoint, you do for the opposing. What are the facts that support that viewpoint? What stakeholders would support that viewpoint based on the 8 key questions? What are the positives of that opposing viewpoint? And then again, what are the negatives of that opposing viewpoint? So this takes a little bit of work. This is what really makes you a good thinker, a person that can think ethically, because you can understand and again articulate a different viewpoint. Okay, so that is a review of the 8 key questions, not the 8 key questions, of the 8 questions on the ethical thinking paper. And again, if you have any more questions, please ask. And I hope this was helpful to you, and have a lovely day or evening or weekend, depending on when it is.